Hey, it's Sean from the Fan Pub again, and I'm doing sleeper picks now. We've looked at Fantasy Pros, and I'm only picking players who are beyond the ADP of 150 and lower. I will mention where they currently stand as of today. I'm going to start off as quite close to the ADP at 150. At 151, we've got Kobe Fleener. Now, I like Kobe Fleener because he's in a very high-powered offence. Last year was his worst year as a professional. Do you know what? He finished tight end 12. And that tells you the growth there, the massive opportunity that exists for him there in New Orleans is huge. So he's on my sleeper list. He's pretty much free. It's free money, really. We talked about how devalued the tight end list was last year when you listen to any of our podcasts so far. And you see how really we're not even worried about picking him early. This is a guy you can get very late in most leagues. Brilliant pick, really, when you consider what kind of growth there could be. Next, I'm picking out good old Kenny Stills at 156. I love the opportunity that Kenny Stills has got this year. I mean, you think what he did last year, right? So he came into Miami and he got 10 touchdowns last year, a lot of long targets as well, a lot of long bombs really, and I think that's still there for him. And I really do think if you've got a certain league format, a certain way, we talked about how good Parker could be, we talked about how good Jarvis Landry is. Kenny Stills is really undervalued at 156. Another great player, late on people's list. He should be late on people's list. Certainly a player you can pick up. I think you can get a lot of value for this pick, so he's on my list. Jacques Rogers at 172. I do apologise, never seem to get his name right. Hopefully I've got it this time. He is going to carry the load for Tampa Bay for the first few weeks of the season because of the suspension to Doug Martin. This doesn't just give him a few weeks value, this could give him longer term value because there's no guarantees, although Doug Martin apparently is having a fantastic camp. He's been working his butt off in the off season and he really has come back as good, is in the best form of his life apparently. But there's no guarantees with Doug Martin. Injuries do strike and things do happen to him. He does seem to have that bit of bad luck following around. And maybe Rodgers has value all year long. And I guess at the very least, if you look at Rodgers as a kind of a, you know, do you need to protect if you've got Doug Martin? You probably do need in any draft to take the backup. Jacques Rogers is that backup and he's going late enough where it's not costing you much. So it's a pretty safe pick, really. I'm going to pick out Rex Burkhead. Now, we all know, as you know, if you listen to some of my earlier podcasts, and you didn't, I'm very high on Gillisley this year. And Rex Burkhead is kind of this under-the-radar guy who could have return value because he's going at 175. And what happens if Gillisley goes down or goes in the doghouse or Bill Belichick doesn't like him? They'll use other running backs. They didn't bring Rex Burkhead to sit on the bench. There's every chance it could end up being Rex Burkhead over Gillisley. I don't think you can really. You've got to believe in one of them or the other. I think you've got to believe in Gillisley. I do, but if I was taking a late round flyer and I wasn't the owner of Gillisley, I'd take a shot at Rex Burkhead. I see no issue with him here. That value is so cheap. It's worth a punt on a team that could change to the running back in a heartbeat. I'd like to have a piece of their running backs as they go towards the playoffs. And if it was Rex Burkhead, you'd be delighted you had him on your team. You're pretty much, it's a punt, of course it's a gamble, but it's an interesting one at 175. This particular next player, this wide receiver Cole Beasley for Dallas, has been probably the best player combination between Dak Prescott and any wide receiver there. They just seem to have a good chemistry going. He did very well last year. I expect that to continue this year. At 188, there's absolutely zero risk. He's at least a flex player option here, Cole Beasley, and in certain games I suspect he could even be in wide receiver 2. I like the opportunities that presented him. Actually, I hope that Des Bryant has a really good year because I think that puts Cole Beasley's value up even more and makes his ADP even better. So I'm very big on him for this year, like him a lot, and he definitely makes my sleeper list based on his current ADP. This particular next player really is a manoeuvring player. This is Jonathan Williams, running back there of Buffalo Bills. He's backing up, of course, McCoy, and I do like the situation where if anything should happen, Jonathan Williams is the likely player to step in and take all the work. Yes, of course, you'll want to cover that eventuality in a number of leagues. I'm not a huge handcuff fan, actually. I think if you've got a stud running back you believe in, you shouldn't need to bother. But if the handcuff is so low that the risk is also low, then I think you can afford to cover. And I think if you're the owner of that kind of running back, I think you probably have to cover him. And Jonathan Williams actually came in as a very high-ranking rookie a couple of seasons back. He hasn't really had the opportunity due to a couple of knocks, but there's certainly talent there. So I like his ADP, I like where it sits, and I like the fact that you can kind of, in certain situations, certain leagues, you can let him marinate on the bench and not have to worry worry about it. If he pans out, great, and if he doesn't, then you can bench him in a year or two and see where you go from there. The next player will surprise a lot of people. I've picked a Ram. Maybe this may be the only Ram that makes the entire list all year as a sleeper pick, but his ADP is so low now, that actually makes him tremendous value. He's a wide receiver 1, and that's Tavon Austin. Yeah, sure, you know, he didn't do an awful lot last year when you really work out the fantasy value, but last year was going a lot higher than this. 205. I mean, just think about that. A wide receiver 1 that deep in a draft. I mean, that basically makes him fairly safe. You aren't losing a lot. Could he get at least 100 fantasy points? Well, we all know he should do that. How high could he go? Rams could be playing a lot of garbage time. They may need a lot of gadget plays. So Tavon Austin now has some value, and it'd be the first time I would actually recommend a potential punt late on in the league. There's a lot of other players around him that do not offer anywhere near this value, so it's very easy to recommend him here. My pick 8 on my sleeper list is James Conner, who's currently backing up Le'Veon Bell. Now, it's just simply because of those reasons. Le'Veon Bell hasn't played a full season for a long time, and there's nearly always 3. He normally misses out on at least 3 games a year. And it just depends what 3, for various reasons. That means James Conner could have some sneaky round value at any point in the season and immediately becomes a running back 1 straight away. We've seen other people do it in that offense. Why wouldn't we believe that James Conner could do this? There will be some arguments over whether James Conner is going to be the number 2 there, but I think he will be. And at ADP 223, this is a punt for nothing, and I see no issues with taking him, really, to be honest, at that point. We've already talked in my previous video about this player, Kevin Galladay, Detroit wide receiver. We already know he's the wide receiver 3. I cannot believe that his ADP is 252. I just think that's way too low on an offense that will throw the ball considerably a lot actually this season. I actually like him because he's in the slot. I like his situation, a big red zone target. I think this is fairly cheap. I mean, this is such a cheap round shot for a player that's got potential to be at least your flex player for a few weeks should you need it during those tricky bye weeks. What's not to like about that? And finally, making the list again, this will be another player that I've liked each year actually, Lance Dunbar, another Ram. Can't believe I'm talking about 2 Rams here on a sleeper list. But you see, the reason I'm picking him out is because he's an outlet valve, third down running back. He's the sort of guy who could have fantastic PPR and half PPR value, could even be useful in redrafts in certain weeks as a cover player. And what I like about him is there are very few running backs that get 10 catches in a game. Lance Dunbar has that capability. He does come with some risks because he has had injuries, but at 275, I think you can just put those injury risks to one side and think to yourself, this is a player I'm pretty much getting for nothing. I've got a player that potentially could play a lot of passing downs in that Rams offense based on the reasons that Sean's given before, and therefore by definition this guy could have a lot of upside. And who's to say that if anything happens to Gurley, just how valuable Lance Dunbar suddenly becomes. So at that range, I'm happy to put him on my sleeper list. Now again, as always with these lists, do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your thoughts? If you like the players we picked out, please tell us. And if you haven't liked them, for whatever reason, we want to hear your thoughts and feelings too.